Sjostrom, and I'm the naturalist on the KATY. There are, of course, a couple of us. You might have been with Colleen last year also. So what I'm going to do is sort of review what the KATY program is and how everything is laid out, and sort of how we work together to sort of give an amazing experience to the students that we have. And we have a variety of different age groups, so we do sort of handle things a little bit differently, just in how we talk to students and just what we cover material-wise. So first of all, the KATY is obviously not here. It's out of the water over in Rockport and getting a new bottom job. So we're going to create a little representation of what we do on the KATY right here. So what we do first is take all the students out to the pavilion, give them sort of a lowdown on the area, the habitats, and again, depending on the group, if they're a geology group, I'll talk more about the structures or barrier islands. If they're more of an aquatic biology high school class, I'll cover more about those ecosystems. So again, you know, we kind of just cater to each group depending on what their interests are and what their goals are for the day. And overall, it's just a fun and exciting learning experience outdoors. So we're pretty lucky that we get to be out there. So the first thing that we do after we get on the boat, and some of the safety rules are, you know, something that we can go through, you know, in a little bit more detail through your booklet and things like that. So after we give the talk, we get everybody down onto the boat. It's really helpful when you guys help sort of corral everybody. You know, it's their first time on the boat. If you remember how you felt the first time you were on the KATY, you don't really know where everything is, and those kids don't either. You know I didn't know where to set everything. So shuttle them through, drop everything in the mid-cabin, and then get them out to that bow. And that's the nicest spot because they're all out of the way for myself getting the lines, and you can move up there with them and just start getting them to notice things. You know, look around, talk about the pelicans, the other boats, anything that they see. It's always kind of fun. So we go out, and there are two different types of trips. When we have those short ones back to back, they're only a couple of hours. So that means we go down the Lydia Ann Channel, and we only do a plankton tow and a trawl. The other trips, generally with older students, we go out the other direction down the ship channel, and what we do is a plankton tow, we get to do a mud grab in Redfish Bay, and then a couple of trawls. And depending on the ship traffic, we either do the bay and then the ship channel, which is the deeper one, or we do the deeper one first and then go do the shallow one. Either way, you know, that's decided by Captain Stan, and that's based on, you know, the large ships that go by, which you probably get to see quite a lot of if you get to be out here. So let's then go through the activities that are on the KATY. The first thing that we do on either trip is the plankton tow. And so what's going to happen there, we have some cards that we might show, but I generally like to leave those over by the microscope and things like that. And once you get on the KATY, and of course if you've been on there, you remember that mid-cabin area is right in front of that wet lab area. So that's where we're going to look at plankton. But we're also, once we do that plankton tow, going to be out on the deck. And this is a fun time because students get to have little samples. So we take the big sample, stick it in 3 little jars, and break off into groups. And this is where it's wonderful if one of you is on board with me, because we can really cover and talk to students a lot more. So what we do, they have the sample, and they actually have their own individual microscopes, and they'll probably have to share. You know, and one of the things I do cover with them, you know, how to move the slide out, sort of how to put the sample right in there, and slide that back in, and then looking through here. And some students are a little bit more patient than others. Sometimes it's frustrating. So you're welcome to sort of help them out. That's always a good thing. And as soon as they see that image, you'll hear all sorts of excited, "Oh my gosh, did you see this? It's moving." And that's, you know, rather than sort of try to get them to identify what they're seeing, we want them to describe what they're seeing. So some of them are moving, some of them aren't moving. Maybe they see structures. You know, on the copepods, they often see antennae, all that sort of thing. So we're actually trying to draw that information out of them. Then what we do, some students stay with these microscopes, and then we sort of circulate through the back. And that's that wet lab area with the television and the microscope, so we can actually project onto the screen what they're seeing. So that's a lot of fun because we get to look at that in a little bit more depth. And it's been fun too. Some students really like to come back and just sort through a sample. They can dump it out right on the deck and keep going and keep looking through things. So some of them really enjoy that. So I like to leave that out on the deck for a little while. And then on the way home, you know, we can double check that everything's rinsed and put up and whatnot. The second thing that we get to do if we're on one of the longer trips is a mud grab. always fun to pick through mud. So what happens, you'll probably give me a hand to move it over to the back deck. We make sure there's a short bucket under there, and then we do the mud grab. And once we get that mud grab back, there are a couple of sieves. And we put samples in those sieves, and then again, we sort of break off into groups, and that's where it's really nice for us to circulate together and just talk to students. What are you finding? Some students actually don't see very much right at the beginning, but just try to sort through, the little bits and pieces. All of a sudden they start seeing the things that wiggle, the things that look different. And so we give them forceps in a little dish, and they get to pick things out carefully. And some of them, again, way more interested than others, and that's completely fine also. So we give them some time to sort through that. That's a great time too. We can sort of move them away and sort of get everything cleaned up and rinsed off behind us. And then we can actually go and project this under the gooseneck scope. And again, if you hadn't been on this here yet, we go through all that. How to turn things on, how to switch between the microscopes, and all that jazz. So during that time, again, I sort of leave the sieves with the stuff, the shell material, and get them, if somebody's interested to keep picking through it later, then they can. So that's a really nice thing to do. Since some really could sit there for hours and pick through everything, it's great. The third thing that we do, or if it's one of the shorter trips, it's the second thing that we do, is do a trawl. And that's when I run the equipment. Stan goes upstairs also when we bring it in. So we're all involved in, getting the net in, getting the net out. And once everything is back on deck and I've shut everything down, then that's when your help is really wonderful. Because students, again, we're going to break them up into groups. So I have the big black bin, if you guys remember. All the stuff is down in the bin, and we remind students, it's okay if you can't see, we're going to pass everything around. And I'll talk a little bit about, maybe a couple of fish, and show them how to hold things like the catfish. Very important that students not handle unless they're responsible, and that's something you and I can, determine. Sometimes it's good to let the students actually just use the nets to get rid of them all if we have a ton of them. So in any case, how to safely hold things, how to safely examine things, I'll show them those types of things. Then we break off into groups again. And so that's where you and I are moving around, having these conversations with students. Always one of the first questions they always say is, what is this? What is the name of this fish? I like to always back off a little bit and say, well, you know what, I'll tell you the name of it, but you need to tell me what you think it eats. How do you think it moves around? Do you think it's a fast fish, slow fish? Why do you think so? And so I want them sort of thinking through what those structures are useful for. And even at the university level, I want them talking about that fish. And if we later identify them down to family, that's awesome. But, they're at least decoding how these fish are different. In the case of a little anchovy, you can open up its mouth wide open and you can see those gill rakers. And so we might name the structure and say, well, what do you think it's sifting out of the water? And then we can refer back to the plankton, since they're plankton eaters. So it's kind of nice to get them really looking hands-on. And some students don't want to touch the fish. That's okay. We let them move around to the different groups. We can also put fish in the live well. And sometimes there are side projects going on. We do have another student that's working with croakers this spring, so we'll save those for him. So we can communicate before everything gets thrown back as to whether we need to keep it or anything at all. So then, on those long trips, we do those 2 trawls. On the short ones, we just do 1 trawl, and then we're headed back to the marina. And the fun thing about that period of time is that, again, most things, the plankton is still out, we still have things in the live well, and depending on the amount of time we have back, the transit time from the longer trips is quite a bit longer. If it's on one of those shorter trips, then we sort of work together to make sure everything's set back, cleaned up, reorganized for the next group, and that really helps also. Then, as we're coming in, we want to have all those fish dumped, except the ones we're keeping, before we get to the marina. And then as we're coming in, it's always nice to remind students, as I'm tying up the boat, just to circulate, make sure they all know to keep those squishable items inside the boat. Since I always say, if you challenge a piling, you'll always lose. So just remind them that, hands up off the rail, and that's a helpful thing because some of them forget as we're coming back into the marina. Another thing to watch out for too that happened last year is to just check the wheelhouse, make sure that nobody's in there, because Stan is upstairs pulling the boat back in. We can't have any students in that wheelhouse during that time because if they start fiddling with controls, then it makes it very difficult for Stan to pull back in to the slip. So overall, of course, we communicate depending on the group that we have, and of course the routines of what we do. It's pretty easy. I know those of you that have been doing it are pretty excited to be out there, and I know we're excited to have you out there because it's a lot of logistics and a lot of things moving around, so it's always helpful to have an extra pair of hands. And just remember, it's a fun educational experience for those students, but we still have to follow those safety rules and sort of keep our heads about us, as it were. So thanks so much. You guys have been a wonderful audience, and I hope to see you out there, and I can't wait to see you guys.